Eagle 6 in the twin.
Roger.
Viper 1 bombs away. One's going to climb high above 20. You're south.
Eagle 6 radar contact. Eagle 6 is visual.
And it goes left.
Hello and welcome back to the DCS SITREP, where we discuss news and information about the world's premier combat flight simulator for the home PC, DCS World. It's made by Eagle Dynamics, and you're listening to me, Prickly Hedgehog, your host, for another packed episode about DCS goodies. We'll start this week with the complex update to the Viper and its INS and GPS systems, which ED went to a lot of detail to explain. WAGS released the first of a series of videos answering community questions stemming from an opportunity for forum members to engage with ED and the development team and ask questions about burning issues within DCS that they had. We also saw another YouTube short from Polychop, which looked pretty enticing. This, of course, is in reference to the Kiowa, and showcased more of the weapons and sensors built into the aircraft. Lastly, and I guess this is an elephant in the room, we'll discuss the public dust-up between RAZBAM and ED, which has garnered a lot of interest, speculation, and certainly concern from community members about this public spat. Now, I fall into the latter on this in terms of concern, and while some have suggested not reposting and discussing this event, I'm a news-based content channel and I'd be remiss in not touching on the topic, so stick around for more on that. Let's start with the technical details in this week's newsletter regarding upgrades coming to the F-16's complex inertial navigation system and its GPS system. The navigation system on the Viper is complicated, and it's a mixture of technical solutions that are intended to supply the avionics with coordinates, velocity, and angles that are characterized by precision, availability, integrity, and autonomy. This is achieved by the cooperative work of the Inertial Navigation System, or INS, the Global Positioning System, GPS, whose navigation inputs are processed through a Kalman filter in the Modular Mission Computer, or MMC. Let's discuss each of these components in detail, says the blurb here. Let's start with the INS. So this is an autonomous device that performs dead reckoning of aircraft coordinates by measuring the accelerations and then integrating them twice whilst taking into account the aircraft's orientation in space. The latter is obtained from the F-16's ring laser gyros. This type of INS is apparently termed strap-down, as there are no rotating parts. Basically, the INS consists of 3 accelerometers, each one for orthogonal axes, and 3 gyros. Now, a couple of terms of note in this information. Firstly, the reference to the Kalman filter, which we have actually discussed in the past on this channel. The reference is indeed to a mathematician named Rudolf Kalman, who developed estimation and prediction algorithms which can compensate for hidden data. They're used in a wide variety of systems, including radars, and in this instance, of course, the INS system of an F-16. Now, the other term is dead reckoning. This is an old sailing term and was used by sailors when landmarks or celestial bodies were unavailable. So sailors would use the last known position as a reference point and then estimate their current position based on time and speed, and also things like drift, such as ones caused by the influence of tidal currents and other anomalies. Now, I made a reference to the book The Wager, which tracked a doomed British expedition in the 18th century. The Wager was wrecked off the coast of Patagonia. So the ship's purser was one of the parties that basically decided to leave the island that they were on and try to sail back to civilization using cannibalized longboats rescued from the wrecked ship, as I said, off the coast of Patagonia. And they used these dead reckoning techniques because the storms and the general weather in the area made it very difficult to maintain fixes, and he was able to sail a small crew basically back around Cape Horn and up to Brazil. It remains one of the greatest feats of sailing ever recorded, more than 1,000 nautical miles. So Kalman filters use dead reckoning as part of their navigation solutions. Obviously, they do it electronically without the intervention of manual human calculation. So ED went on to explain that the main features of the INS improvements are as follows. Firstly, we have autonomy. It doesn't require any external signals to do the dead reckoning. Stability. In a short period of time, it can activate itself 5 to 10 minutes Noticeable error accumulation, so over longer periods of time based on the physics of dead reckoning, together with the integration of accelerations to update speed and integration of position to update coordinates, the small errors at the level of accelerations that are introduced by accelerometer noises and imperfect alignment are integrated twice as well. Furthermore, the larger those errors are, the faster they accumulate due to the so-called integral correction of INS, which updates the local Earth gravitational force vector with the coordinates and adds them into the relative angles of the G vector. Another distinctive feature of INS is the Schuler oscillation with a period of 84.4 minutes. Due to the integral correction algorithm, mentioned above, the INS behaves like a pendulum. In ideal circumstances, it stays in equilibrium while the aircraft moves along the Earth or around the Earth. When coordinate errors appear, it displaces the pendulum from the resting point and it starts oscillating. The larger the errors are, the larger the amplitude of the introduced oscillations. So that's why one may notice that INS errors get smaller at a rate of 84.4 minutes once airborne. Pretty complicated stuff, pretty sophisticated stuff that we have in these aircraft these days, and for good reason. Right, turning to GPS, which most people will have a basic grasp of. These measure the aircraft's position by measuring the signal propagation delay from GPS satellites to the receiver. Satellite orbits are precisely known. The exact positions of the satellites are computed according to an almanac that is transmitted in the same GPS radio signals. That's why GPS needs a couple of minutes after the cold start to obtain the almanac. The moments of the signal transmission are also known and are defined by a very precise atomic clock on board the satellite. Thus, in an ideal case, if the GPS signals are propagated through space with the constant speed of light, as they do in a vacuum, the receiver could precisely determine its position by intersecting the surfaces of equidistant radio signal delays from the satellites. You may think of it, they say, as spheres with centers located at the satellite's positions, although it's a bit more complicated in real life, they say. However, there are two significant factors that prevent us from obtaining the ideal point of the surface intersections: the ionospheric delay and multipath. Both add unknown time to the actual signal propagation in time. So multipath happens when the receiver is placed relatively near the ground and the signal may be reflected from ground objects that result in the signal's edges degrading. This is similar to an echo in the mountains where it's too hard to tell one word from another. When this delay occurs unexpectedly through the receiver, the precise navigation solutions get lost and the output coordinate gets noisy. That's where military GPS signals help to get a better signal resolution by the use of so-called P-codes, and the usage of dual frequency helps to eliminate the unknown ionospheric delay. I was having trouble saying that before. Right, integrated solution Kalman filtering. So to summarize the above, they have two navigation systems in the Viper, both of which have flaws. The INS accumulates errors over time. GPS is noisy and prone to interference due to natural factors like multipath and ionospheric delay, and to enemy jamming and spoofing for good measure. So here's the good news. There is a way to avoid these flaws with the Kalman filter. It takes GPS and INS coordinates together with speeds as its input. The Kalman filter is a great algorithm that is able to get the maximum precision even out of measurements that are far from ideal, and it takes the best aspects from both systems: the stability and autonomy of the INS and the precision of GPS to obtain an integrated navigation solution that is both stable and precise. Furthermore, the Kalman filter knows, in terms of mathematical equations, the dynamic properties of the aircraft that is moving through space. If the aircraft is moving, it predicts where the aircraft will be on the next filter step. That's something that you see in these radar systems that we mentioned earlier. So that's why it's called recursive, and the filter won't let erroneous GPS signals decrease the precision of the output navigation solution. It's able to dynamically change its measurement versus prediction weights to adjust to a degraded navigation precision of any input. Again, it's pretty sophisticated stuff. For most people running shorter mission sets, this really won't affect the general flight experience, I think. For those nerds who run longer mission sets, remember we talked about the INS degradation over longer time periods, that may require an update or some sort of fixed point just to confirm that the degradation isn't too wild. So as you saw in areas with GPS jamming and other signal system interferences, there is potential for greater variations in positions. Since an aircraft moves really fast through the air and time and space, even small variations can potentially put you miles off course. Typically, they have said without sort of correction, it can be 3 miles or so for every hour, give or take roughly. Again, it depends on the individual system. This is a ballpark, not a gospel here. So one aircraft I heard that was notorious for navigational malfeasance was the Tomcat, actually, especially the early ones. And many crews, once they became available, started carrying portable GPS systems to aid in the navigation process. As I said, those early variants didn't have built-in GPS systems, and the Tomcat's INS apparently was notorious for wobbling off course. So in the past, discussions like this have devolved into a lot of argument about the accuracy of GPS and its relationship to the INS systems. I don't know why. As you can see, this is a very complex system to recreate, and I suspect it will have a particular relevancy again when the world map gets introduced. It's important to not confuse the GPS operation that we're talking about to your car's navigation system. Doesn't necessarily pair well to the complex systems in an aircraft. While satellite data is in play as described, it's also important to remember that your car is traveling at relatively pedestrian speeds by comparison to modern jet aircraft, and it's also running on slabs of largely permanent fixed points like roads, which are already mapped. So it's a lot easier to get accurate data. You don't require as many satellites. It's just easier to track slower moving objects like that on known points, right? And that's why it's a little bit difficult to make apples to apples comparisons. Similar, but not entirely. So this stuff really appeals to me, and the nerd in me, of course. And as I said, I think it will benefit the purists who are running long mission sets and aren't popping into the F10 map to cheat and check where they are. Those that enjoy fixed taking and cross-referencing navigational positions, I think are going to love this. Personally, I think it's a real work of art in terms of simulation of a very complex real-world pieces of equipment. In fact, it's going to be interesting to see how it works out in the game in the near future here, so stay tuned. Side note, before we get into the next topic too, we are supposed to get a patch update this week, but that was put on hold, so we'll have to wait for that patch. It's not clear what the specifics of why that delay occurred, so we'll have to wait and see.
Alright, I see you getting closer, so I'm going to push it up to 350. And 350 for today will be our contract speed.
Hello there, Wags.
Hey, Prickly.
Some time back, ED opened up a Q&A opportunity for forum members to ask questions about the game's ongoing evolution and development process, and progress, for that matter. So Wags kicked off the first of a series of videos that are intended this week with answers to questions about core engine performance. They decided to go with that particular category this week. Now, in short, we're going to see continued development and tweaks to the performance engine first. These include further enhancements to things like multi-threading. He talked about frame generation, DLSS improvements and tweaks, and also implementation of later generations of FSR. They will be bringing a Vulkan API on board, initially in terms of multi-platform efforts, so I'm wondering if we're going to see it on things like PlayStation, Xbox, that kind of stuff. We'll have to wait and see. But later, the focus will turn to performance improvements without having to use DirectX 12. He indicated that they have no plans for DirectX 12 at this point, unfortunately, which makes sense though if they have their eyes on Vulkan API as the mechanism for unlocking game performance, inhibited by the way DirectX 11 functions as an interface. Remember that both Vulkan API and DirectX 12 allow better performance optimization paralleling the hardware that is in our systems, or in most people's systems perhaps, and also superior asynchronous computing than DirectX 11 does. It's a little bit more linear, DirectX 11, in the way it pipelines processes. So that's why a lot of games are using DirectX 12 or Vulkan API. Right? Vulkan's been around for a while. A lot of people sort of bring this up as a Vulkan API is not a new thing, you realize, and yeah, it's not. It's a more agnostic system, I suppose, than the Microsoft ones that are available as an API for game synchronization. Anyway, Wags explained that the game's performance is split in two layers. We have the graphics layer first, and then the logic layer. The former, he explained, is where most of their focus has been in terms of performance, and we saw that earlier this year with reference to the terrain mapping stuff that they tweaked to get better performance out of it. However, the logic layer will receive attention next year, and this will tackle things like unit numbers on the ground inhibiting performance for some users. This is a big deal, actually, I suspect. Something that I'm looking forward to as well, because I also suspect that that logic layer will unlock the performance that they need to run a dynamic campaign properly, especially where you might have large numbers of units on the ground where they're clustered in areas like choke points or frontline clashes. And a lot of that's going to have to be nutted out in terms of the AI logic in general, but I'm very interested to see how they tackle that particular problem and open up the performance of the game a lot more against this interface and the hardware that they're looking at. So cool stuff. Now, some users complained on the forums that there was too much general information and enough complex specifics. It was pointed out that the videos responded to questions that users had. So technically it's not a Q&A for software and hardware engineers. So some people were like, this is really basic, I already understood this, it's a bit insulting, you know, this wasn't generated towards me, everybody else is a thicko. Again, they're pitching to the middle here, peeps. Okay, this was the first video too, and as I said, you're pitching in the middle in terms of audience, and that can be challenging to balance. Wags is obviously a very, very clever guy. I laughed at somebody made a comment that Wags was so smooth in this video that he almost slid off the, his icon almost slid off the screen. But software and engineering, I don't think his permanent wheelhouse, if you like. So again, you're pitching to a general audience and what you understand. If you don't understand it, it can be hard to, explain it. Certainly not my wheelhouse, that's for sure. So again, some people also complained about a lack of specific timelines rather than these general vagaries. This will occur next year, this will occur this year. Again, I think that's reasonable. It's very difficult to pin down finite dates in a fluid environment where competitors are also monitoring your progress as well. So again, with the fluidity of this development process that we're seeing, and we see it enough with even finite products like modules and maps and all this kind of stuff, I understand why things were a little bit vague, and I also understand why that was also frustrating for some people. But it's also a good point that it reminded me, some of the comments, you can't please some of the community any of the time. So I hope we can have productive conversations and give productive feedback. I still believe you get better results from carrot rather than stick. And if you're completely negative and scorching in your comments and your criticism, there is the potential for losing the important content that you're trying to deliver. So there's a way of doing these things. Regardless, we'll see how the next video goes as Wags clambers through 2,000 odd questions, which they grouped into categories for convenience. As I said, they started with the performance one, and that seems reasonable. I expect successive videos to become snappier, especially in areas that are closer to Wags' real wheelhouse. Overall, I think this was a useful form of interaction for the community to get to grips with, and looking forward to seeing more and seeing what Wags does with this. Whether he brings in other people too to maybe help with some topics, I don't know. But for a first tentative sort of dip your toe in the water, I didn't think it was a bad video. I thought it was productive. Sure, it's not going to answer every question. I don't think every question will be answered, to be honest, because there may be some things that they just simply can't give us more specifics on or deliver more information on. So again, we'll see how things go. Now, useful interactions, while we're speaking of that, we did see, as I mentioned before, a nice little snippet from Polychop this week showcasing some more in-game action with the Kiowa. So this will pair up nicely, this helicopter, with the Afghanistan map set for release in June, but the actual release of the helicopter itself is still under wraps. We do know that it has been in testing. We know that they have been doing a lot of work on it. We're seeing these revelations, if you like, of more illustrations of the sensors and the weapons in this case. And yeah, it was definitely teaser stuff, but I like to think it hints at a more overarching possibility of a complete product. I use that term loosely, as we're still talking early access complete rather than complete, because as we know, that's not a thing in DCS world, because a lot of these modules are in limbo, if you like, or development process for the early access, sometimes for years. And that's the nature of this beast. And in fact, it mirrors some real life aspects of aircraft as well. So many of you, I know, are not holding your breath about this module until the actual aircraft is on sale and in game in the virtual world of DCS world. Fair enough. I'm pretty confident that this ain't no vaporware aircraft, all right? And we're getting close. I think we're getting very, very close, and we'll see how accurate I am, hopefully in the coming weeks, and hopefully not months, but We've got a lot of projects in the pipeline and a lot of things to flesh out here and resolve, I think, as DCS moves on in its evolution. Now, another tidbit that I couldn't ignore came via Jabbers on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call that damn thing now. And he posted a screenshot, if you like, or a capture of a comment from Nineline about the ED team working on Vietnam and some sort of Korean peninsula map. And he said that the challenge is a technical one in terms of hurdles with the current TDK system to produce those maps, which he indicated is close to being overcome. So this is really, really good news. I can't verify where this came from exactly, and I hope it wasn't some sort of unofficial leak that somebody captured, because as you remember in the Afghanistan interview with Wags from Casmo last week, he hinted ED was working on two non-desert maps that he couldn't talk about, one of which was going to be one that pleased the community greatly. I suspect it was going to be Vietnam or the Korean theater. So now it's sort of unofficially confirmed. And it also confirms, I think, speculation that we in the community have talked about. One of the reasons why desert maps are done is because of the challenges of highly detailed maps with a lot of vegetation. We saw that with Marianas, and they had to do a lot of optimization work to get that running in a way that didn't completely turn the game into a slideshow for some people. I think they achieved that. It's still a pretty challenging map, so we'll see how the resolutions that they come up with influence these future maps and even some of the existing maps perhaps. Some people are even asking about upgrading the Caucasus as an example. Who knows? We've seen some improvements to the Caucasus, I might add, but nothing as comprehensive as something that indicates they've re-fleshed it out. We'll see. It was a really interesting little snippet, I think, and I think it will be good news, obviously, for those players that are desperate to see something other than Middle East and now Central Asia areas of the map. Building process, we do have Cola as well coming up, and I think you're going to enjoy that. I'm really excited about this map. It's going to be a fun map. I think you're going to enjoy that one, and hopefully we'll see some official announcements from the team coming here fairly soon. In private discussions, they have a list of things that were really interesting that they talked about in terms of the features that we're going to see, and then the updates that they're going to make to the map once it's released. Can't talk about those specifics, but I'm excited about this map, and again, I hope it's one that the community enjoys, because I think they will.
We're going to try and be as precise as we can with it, but the purpose of practicing is just to know how to execute the maneuver for when we need to do it with people shooting at us or whatever.
All right, well, let's talk about the controversy here, the third part of this video, and that is the public conflict between RAZBAM's head honcho Ron Zambrano and the counter response that we got from Eagle Dynamics' head honcho Nick Gray this week. We'll start with Ron Zambrano's publicly posted statement indicating an ongoing conflict with ED, which was pretty interesting. We'll start with that, and he goes on to say here that you may have noticed that the latest RAZBAM announcements doesn't include any changelog or updates to their current products. They would like to inform you, he says, that until further notice, all support for RAZBAM developed aircraft modules is on hold. It doesn't say maps there, but we'll wait and see. Now, this suspension encompasses but is not limited to bug fixes and updates. So a couple of worrying things there about that. We will have to wait and see what this encompasses as this process evolves, and hopefully it's a short thing and not a long-winded one, because that's going to have ramifications for everyone concerned. Now, they want to reaffirm their unwavering commitment to this exceptional community, our current customers and prospective clients. So that's good news. They're not just collapsing and folding here. Unfortunately, due to circumstances completely beyond our control, he says, we are temporarily unable to continue our work at this time. Our team, a group of highly skilled and professional developers, is first and foremost made up of dedicated individuals. They invest not only their expertise, but also their personal dedication and sacrifice into crafting our products. For many, this work provides essential supplementary income or even constitutes their primary livelihood. And like a lot of teams, you'll know, a lot of the developers and workers for third-party developers are actually scattered around the world. So it's not necessarily a group of centralized people working in an office somewhere. And that's a pretty typical business model in this particular genre of gaming. So they're hopeful for a swift resolution so that they can resume normal operations. However, until these issues are resolved, we will not be issuing any updates about our products. We ask for your understanding during this challenging period, a situation that RAZBAM simulations did not seek and which has previously seriously affected other parties, for example, heat blur simulations. Very interesting that he pulled in other third parties here. So this is an indication of historical issues, and specifically citing heat blur simulations, who have wisely kept out of this since the primary conflict is between RAZBAM and Eagle Dynamics. He goes on to say, however, that they have been patient, perhaps too patient, waiting for a resolution from the responsible parties. Now we find it necessary to take a stand and await a practical solution to this deadlock. Okay, so they're in a deadlock, and that's why he's gone public. I also want to extend my heartfelt thanks to my fellow third-party developers. Again, he's dragged in the non-ED parties here. Their support, once aware of the relevant facts, has been overwhelming. Thank you for elevating DCS to new heights. It truly wouldn't be the remarkable experience it is without your contribution. So, there is a lot of communication between the third-party developers and assistants. I know there's a lot of we've seen it with Heat Blur taking on True Grit, and I know there is some symbiosis between those various groups because they're in this kind of a similar situation, developing software, if you like, and modules and other bits and pieces for the game. So there's a commonality there. That would make sense that he would side with them, especially if you're in conflict with the main body, so to speak, just from a practical point of view. Now, the suspension will remain in effect until the significant issues between Eagle Dynamics and RAZBAM Simulations LLC is resolved to their mutual satisfaction. Once these issues have been addressed, we will resume our standard practices of bug fixing, updates, and upgrades, just as we have since our inception as developers for DCS. We hope this resolution results in a more stable and optimistic future for DCS and all its third-party developers. So again, he's kind of waving the flag for RAZBAM and the third-party developers. Again, I think that's an interesting point there. And then he goes on to say, best regards, to round out the statement. Now, I'm not going to ask anyone to pick sides here, or I'm not going to pick sides here, at least let's rephrase that. I'm not going to pick sides here or ask people to do so. So let's try to objectively analyze this statement, as I've kind of been trying to do as we read it out there. Given that there has been some more leaked details from some RAZBAM personnel since that statement was released, which is part of the problem when you go public like this. There's going to be side picking, there's going to be speculation, and there's going to be some people that are going to speak not necessarily through the main voice piece, right? So the first issue to tackle is why go public on an in-house conflict, and I think we saw that because he used the term deadlock. So this has to be a calculated move to draw attention to an ongoing issue where the two sides have reached this impasse, or this deadlock as he described. And as I said before, it's interesting that he pulled in the third-party developers into the fray, unofficially, I guess, or artificially kind of garnering their support on his stance. It's clear that he indicated some financial kind of issues, and what we know now is that, as I said before, some of these other employees, if you like, or RAZBAM representatives have indicated some sort of lack of payment. It seems to be centered around the F-15E is what I'm garnering here. Now, the problem, of course, is once you make the public statement, you've now played your hand in terms of what kind of resolution you want. So it's a bit of a declaration, not of war necessarily, but of your stance, what your expectations are, and it can be hard to control the narrative in terms of how the DCS community sees the issue and what kind of response they'll have to it and towards the respective parties. And the other reality is, for most of us on the outside, we don't have all of the facts and the subtlety attached to the conflict to make a proper assessment of what's going on. It's natural for people to want to pick a side, whether it's a moral issue, whether it's some sort of slight, or however else you see it. There's going to be a certain amount of politicking, if you like, in all of this, and that can be unhelpful, right? So what we have heard, as I said, from those initial statements is that some of the staff have not been paid for work around the F-15E Strike Eagle, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. So once you've made the public statement, you've basically embedded yourself with a public conflict now, so you can expect a couple of things to happen. One would be public silence, one would be possible litigation, or more likely a public counter statement, and that's what we got from Nick Gray over at ED on their Discord sometime after the initial RAZBAM post. And Nick Gray said the following. So following the published message from Ron Zambrano of RAZBAM Simulations, we believe that it is necessary to rectify some of the unfounded allegations and to reassure the community that everything is being done to resolve the current situation promptly and for the benefit of all concerned. So some conciliatory statements there, but also some accusations about unfounded allegations. So without entering into the details of matters that are confidential to the parties, so a reminder about probably the non-disclosure agreements, etc., and the contractual arrangements of this particular module. We'll assume it's the module. ED firmly rejects the allegations that the current disagreement between Eagle Dynamics and RAZBAM Simulations would be, as stated by RAZBAM, due to circumstances completely beyond our control, and that it is a situation that RAZBAM Simulations did not seek. So again, sort of more accusatory language there. On the contrary, and he goes on to double down here, the current disagreement is the result of improper action. So he cites a specific issue that have been taken by RAZBAM Simulations in breach of its contractual obligations towards our company and of our legally protected IP rights, and for which we are seeking a reasonable and forward-looking commercial outcome rather than entertaining legal claims. So, pretty direct language, but also saying we don't want to get into a legal battle with you. Understandably, litigation is expensive, and it may not, in the grand scheme of things, benefit both parties because you lose as much money as what you're probably trying to recoup, potentially, depending on how long it drags out, etc., etc. So nobody can necessarily benefit from that except perhaps to resolve the issue. Whether you still have a working relationship after that is another big problem here as well, and that's the concerning thing here too that needs to hopefully be resolved. Anyway, he says they regret that Ron Zambrano has decided, without even pre-advising us, to make these disparaging public statements, and more importantly, to take the customers of the RAZBAM development aircraft as leverage in the discussion with us. It's probably reasonable. But again, here's the reconciliatory part of it. Please rest assured we are addressing the situation with the utmost attention and constructiveness. Now, obviously, that is fired at both RAZBAM and also to the community. He finishes his letter with many thanks and kind regards. So in simple terms, what do we have here? Well, we have RAZBAM arguing that they haven't been paid, and ED has indicated that RAZBAM are in breach of contract arrangements. So in other words, they're both citing some sort of breach of contract. It's also a PR nightmare, right? As I alluded to before, in terms of managing the public perception of issues we're not fully versed in, and ultimately it leaves a huge amount of mixed emotions for the community, as I said before, in terms of picking sides, in terms of how you react to that without all of the information before us. It also means that we have several very, very popular aircraft, specifically the F-15, the Mirage 2000, and the Harrier, in limbo and potentially compromised its assets the longer this dispute goes on. If updates and fixes aren't maintained, we could potentially see these aircraft as unplayable in future iterations of core updates, and that usually means with regards to the game's evolution, which we have seen with the Hawk many years ago as well, where they weren't interested or stopped updating it, right? And so it becomes unplayable by the time an engine update occurs of significance, or rolls into a new iteration. So both sides, I think, are going to have to play this pretty carefully, as the mob can also be fickle too, and sympathy for a cause might or could morph into anger. Pitchforks and torches will be out, as the community members are quick to anger on issues of much less importance than this, so there definitely needs to be some sort of resolution. Hopefully they can do it. Based on the language the two sides have used, both have used accusatory language, but there's also some desire for reconciliation, I think, and I hope and pray that, and I suspect also that rational and cool heads will prevail in all of this. Whether it morphs, as I said, into a litigious issue to resolve the breach of contract concerns to everyone's satisfaction is anyone's guess. Our community hope, because this is definitely distressing, is that the two sides can resolve the matter swiftly. So yeah, lots of things to unpack, and we could talk about this for a very, very long time. I don't know how helpful that is. I think, like I said before, I'm in the more of the distressing, concerning camp rather than wanting to pick blame or pick fights with any one side. Both teams make fantastic products. We need RAZBAM in the game. We need all of these third parties in the game, for a matter of fact. Some people speculated that this is why Heatblur's Phantom was delayed. I don't think that's true, because Heatblur generally play their cards pretty close to their chest with regards to updates on modules that they're not willing to share with the community. They tend to be a team that, like, hey, we've been silent for a while. These are the reasons why. We've been working very hard. Now we're ready to tell you what we're working on. They don't like to just throw out stuff on a weekly, monthly basis unless they actually have something tangible to present, which is a smart move on their part. When they talked about the delay for the Phantom, they were very, very expressive, very apologetic, and they went to a tremendous amount of detail into the reasons why. And never was there any reference to conflicts with Eagle Dynamics of this nature. Those have all come from Ron Zambrano, and again, Heapler is going to remain silent on this, I guess, unless something weird happens. But again, I don't think that their delay is in any way, shape, or form connected to this. It's possible, but I think they went to a heck of a lot of trouble to explain why the Phantom was delayed. As I said, that's unusual for them in terms of their modus operandi. They're a team, as I said before, that only reveals information when they feel it's relevant, and it's very pertinent to where they're at in their steps of development progress. They don't like to hype, right? They're very much against the hype train. So I think the statements that they made earlier about their development processes were very genuine, because they were insistent that they had hoped to get the aircraft out in Q1, like I had predicted. So we'll have to see how things evolve. I'm going to keep my ear to the ground, obviously, and I think we're all hoping for a peaceful resolution that satiates both teams' needs for contractual obligations to be met, and hopefully any of those sticking points can be resolved and we can all move on with life and enjoy flying the fantastic modules that RAZBAM has in the game, along with all those other third-party developers as well.
All right, you can see the carrot falling down to the drop range. You can see these two lines coming in. So you can pickle now if you wanted to, but there's the circle. And pops away.
Well, we're out of time, thank God, so that'll do for this week's SITREP. Before we go, congrats to, and if I get this name wrong, apologize. Congrats to Gregor Pajhauser 2850 for winning the Phantom II giveaway this week that I promised a couple of weeks back. You are the lucky winner. So get in touch with me via email and we'll get you sorted out with your module. We will have another giveaway once the Phantom II is released, so stay tuned for another episode on that. Thanks for tuning in and supporting the channel once again this week. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Thank you to those super thanks people. It really helps the channel chug along. So come back next time for more news and information about DCS World. This is Prickly Hedgehog out. Cheers.
Dude, I think I know what happened. Do this run and then I'll tell you.